welcome back to Dortmund Dispatch. Today I'm joined by Pedro, and we have a special guest from the Neverkusen Podcast joining us today. It's Erik Brule. I'm gonna butcher your last
You
name
did.
there.
You
Very
nailed it.
sorry about
You nailed
that.
it.
Oh, perfect, perfect. Um, and we're discussing the Bundesliga Champions League sides this season. And we're going to be starting at the top of the table and working down to surprisingly Dortmund not being the last of the Champions League sides at this time. But how are you guys doing today?
Yeah, I'm great. Eric, first, nice to meet you, and it's nice to be have you in the podcast. I'm good. Had a busy weekend, had a lot of stuff to do. Haven't had much sleep, to be honest, but I'm surviving and grinding. And I mean, it's not always good for us club fans to watch international football. I like it sometimes, but recently I've been more into Dortmund and, of course, the Bundesliga. But I think we have a lot of stuff to talk about, and it's nice too having a different face out here.
Yeah, thank you both, Pedro and Eli, for having me on. I totally agree with Pedro. It's the case that the international weeks are sometimes really difficult to get through, especially with these new Nation League tournaments, which I don't know what to actually think about. But looking forward to getting back into the Bundesliga and obviously for all of us getting back into the Champions League because that's where we both seem to be really making some waves.
Yeah, I've seen someone say that we need to essentially get rid of like the repeated international breaks and just make like one international break. And like I 100% agree with that because this is getting ridiculous. Like the season, felt like it was going for 2 weeks, stops for a week, goes for 2 weeks, and in the state of like modern football, you have so much like cross like world flights. It's just really annoying to kind of break up the season like that, and then also to kind of like just give an extra injury risk to all those footballers at the highest level. So I think that's a radical change. I don't think it'll ever happen, but I think it makes a lot of sense to me at least. But let's get into our first topic. We're going to be starting with top of the league, unfortunately, Bayern Munich. So their positives, their XG difference per 90 is 1.53. That's about the same place it was last year. And like the first in the league is like the biggest positive. What have you guys noticed from Bayern? Let's start with Erik because Leverkusen have actually played Bayern already this year.
Yeah, and I'm not so much of a stats guy, and I'm not saying I'm disparaging that at all. It's just not. I'm not good at it. I'm terrible at math. So I have to use the old trusted eye test, so to speak. And from what we've seen from Bayern, they can certainly compete in the Bundesliga this year. I don't know that they're necessarily set up to compete all the way through the Champions League. But they've really, what's really impressed me. I think we're seeing kind of the deterioration a little bit of Harry Kane, but at the same time, you're seeing, Jerome Musiala doing his thing. I've been just wonderfully impressed. I'm so angry that they got him with Michael Olise. He's just been absolutely fantastic, both in the Bundesliga, but especially in the Champions League. And they're they're looking like they could be contenders again if Serge Gnabry's playing a little bit better. That's great. Pavlovic is obviously going to be one of those young guns that they talk about the way they're talking about Vitz and Musiala right now at some point here in the next year or two. So I think I think they're definitely set up for success in the Bundesliga. That that they're going to challenge until the end in the Champions League, especially that match against Aston Villa, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit. You can see that they might not be suited for a finals run in that regard. I'll just say it was so nice to see Manuel Neuer get lobbed by the who was that, John Duran.
John
Yeah,
Duran.
Yeah, yeah, no, I completely agree with Eric. And I like to say that I'm not as much as a stats guy, but I mean, we all from Document Dispatch, we all use stats and we are good with it. I think Eli is our official stats guy, but at the same time, it's for me, the stats are never should be wanting to be analyzed on its own. It's always should be followed for the eye test, which I completely agree with Eric. And for me, I think Bayer has hit the ground running for these first few matches in the season. Of course, they had a few setbacks and a few things we're going to discuss, especially with the Aston Villa game. And also, they had a difficult match against Frankfurt as well that draw 3-3. But I remember watching the Leverkusen match. I watched most of that match, and it really impressed me how a side like Bayern managed to press Leverkusen so and completely dominate that game. Of course, they're at their home and they should do that, but I was expecting Leverkusen to do something, but they were just completely outplayed by at Bayer in that game. So in that sense, I believe they have something there, unfortunately. But I think they're gonna be ups and downs. They have a young coach, new coach in town, a few new players. They're still they're figuring out their defense as a whole, as a unit. So I'm curious how that's gonna play out, but hopefully negatively for them, and hopefully our clubs have a better shot at the Bundesliga trophy.
Yeah, so well, I would say for them, in terms of like the positives, like I watched a couple minutes of the match against Leverkusen. I was walking around Dusseldorf, having just arrived in the city, coming from Dortmund, and I didn't get to see a ton of the match. What I did see was essentially just Jamal Musiala popping up in between the lines, receiving the ball, carrying forward. And like he's very good, and I think he will always be very good. But I didn't really see where their chance creation was gonna really come from, unless Jamal Musiala like beat a second person or a second line of defense. Because as dominant as Bayern were, they didn't like create a ton of like really good chances in that match. And the other match I watched them against was against Holstein Kiel, and pretty much everyone that's played up against Holstein Kiel, with the exception of Leverkusen, actually, has kind of dominated Holstein Kiel. So if you look at where their like XG difference comes from, which is just your XG4 minus your XG against, 64% of it has come in two matches, two of their six matches, coming against Werder Bremen and Kiel, which are not like that's not entirely abnormal. But then if you look, and we're talking about the eye test, they've played close games in the eye test against Wolfsburg, Freiburg, Frankfurt, Leverkusen, and Aston Villa. And if you're playing close games against all these sides, that's not like what we've necessarily seen from some of these dominant sides from Bayern in years past. Like if you're looking at when they were on their like 11 consecutive title run, unless they were up against like a Dortmund, a Leverkusen, on Advertising FC, any of like those clubs, they might play like a close match. But for the most part, against your upper to mid table, like maybe Europa League sides, like your Freiburgs and your Wolfsburgs, they'd largely be very convincing. Obviously, dropping points here or there in a given season, but I just think that up against the superior coaches, Vincent Company's looked a lot less dominant, or his side has looked a lot less dominant. That could still be because his side's like learning how to play his type of football, but it could also be that like he's not necessarily the best coach, because he hasn't necessarily proved it yet.
And I would just add to that, as part of the eye test, I should have been a little more less general. I was just lauding some of their offensive players, but part of that eye test also includes like they have woeful center backs, and every team has figured out how to get past Upamecano, how to get past who's ever back there. With a ball over the top that they panic, and that's really where their biggest weakness is, in my opinion. Aston Villa showed that really well, that if he can play out of that forward pressing that they do, and play the ball out enough to like loop it over Upamecano, even though he's super fast, he just doesn't seem to. He's not the same defender he was at Leipzig. I'll say that. And yeah, that's where they're really struggling, and where they're going to continue struggling, because I don't know that they're doing anything to improve that position.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna add up to what Eli said. Actually, I think it's interesting that we have so many young coaches in the league, that as much as they haven't proved anything yet, they still has shown us of a good a good sample of good enough of a sample for us to have an idea of how they play and how they want to contribute to the league and to the style of the league, and to make it more entertaining and to gather more fans. And I think it's really interesting. I already saw good things in company at the Premier League last season. Of course, I don't think he had the human resources to actually make his style actually work properly at the Premier League level, especially in a club like Burnley. But it's still a good enough of a try, and it was interesting by appointing them. And even though he still has a lot of stuff to prove, he has showed some interesting stuff. And as much as I think Sahim as well, he showed some good moments as well, but still struggling to get his style fully implemented in the squad. So in that sense, I believe that how can I put this? I think they still have a lot to prove, but at the same time, I think the only winner in this case is the league, and I think the Bundesliga is going to get even more entertaining. I think a lot of people call or label the league as the Farmers League, but this is a hard league. Like, you're going to struggle against sides like Wolfsburg, against Leverkusen, against Frankfurt, who has played some good football in this season, in my opinion. We don't know how Mönchengladbach is gonna if they're gonna stick with their manager, but they have a good squad as well, so they might help in the competition as well. I think it's gonna be a difficult year, even in a side like Bayern that's showing dominance. I still think there's gonna be a good amount of competition. I don't think this league is gonna finish with a huge amount of points of difference between these clubs, and we're gonna talk more about those other clubs. But I think it's gonna be really interesting to see how that all plays out.
Yeah, also like Polinia hasn't really played a ton yet. Massive signing, but then again, like he very much struggles to possess the ball. And like you're talking about how Company has shown he really wants to play in a certain style, and that's a high possession style. And I just would like to thank the Bayern board for completely ignoring his track record of doing that and going out and spending like what was it, 70 million euros on a guy who is literally known for being a liability in possession. Um, Very good defensive midfielder, and maybe like you're talking about some of the space in behind that Upamecano has struggled with, Eric. A way you can kind of fix that is by bringing in to your side the 70 million pound destroyer you got. Even if he is a liability in possession, he could like press guys, and instead of giving them the time and space to play those balls in behind, he can force them to pass back and provide a bit more stability in the transition moments. So that's a way Bayern could get better. Hopefully, the liability in possession that you get when you play Polinia kind of makes Company shy away from that, and he just goes down as like another Bayern signing where they spent a lot of money for a midfielder for him to not necessarily do much. That's my hope. Nothing against Polinia, but it's very different defending for Fulham and Bayern. But let's get into our next side, and that's going to be the advertisement firm, um, Lawn Ball Sport Leipzig. So their positive is that they're tied for first, and they beat Leverkusen. I don't want to rub salt in your wound, but as a very good side, when you pick up 3 points against the top side early in the season, that's something that like you can always just like check off as a box and say like that's a positive. Like you weren't necessarily expected to get anything from that game, but they did obviously. A bit lucky to do so, in my opinion. I did watch the game, but like the underlying numbers, they have a worse XG difference per 90 than Dortmund last year. They've played a fairly difficult start to the campaign, but to me, they just don't look. They don't look special.
I'm gonna uh, Yeah, and sorry for jumping in front, Pedro, but I'm going to disagree. I like really have Red Bull up there as like this could be their year as far as I'm concerned. The Champions League hasn't been very kind to them, um, but they kept Siemens and with Siemens, Apenda, um, who's the guy I'm missing? Sesko. Like they have some pretty incredible goal scorers. Hydera's very good. I think they're probably weakest at defensive mid. They don't seem to have someone that they compare with Hydera as well. But and they're also again their center backs. Willie Orban's getting up there in age. I can't actually believe that he's still playing for this team, starting for this team. But yeah, I mean, and maybe I'm a little bit biased because of that Leverkusen match where they really they just kept coming at Leverkusen, and that's usually what Leverkusen does. And I think they have a really wonderful kind of mix of like experience and like Kevin Campbell, Orban, Gulashi, with these young guys, Simons, Openda, etc. I I would be very wary. I mean, yeah, like I said, or like you said, Eli, they won the Plastico, El Plastico. So if you can beat the former champion or that year's champion, that already says something. And their two losses in the Champions League have just really come against really difficult teams. I mean, for any German team to play and defeat.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna stay in the middle in that one because I don't rate as high as Eric does. Not Leverkusen, sorry, Leipzig. But at the same time, I don't discount them in a sense. I think they have a good squad. I think they have that good mix that Eric just mentioned, the mix of experience with the youth. And when you have a striking duo like Openda and Šeško, you always gotta have a shot to win the match. And I think they did that against Leverkusen. And I really like that combination because they are really different profiles and archetypes of strikers, but they really support each other in a sense. You got the speedster and explosive profile in Openda, and you got the technical and ball striking guy like Seshko. So in that sense, I think they have a shot with those guys, and uh, they're always going to be dangerous in those counter pressing and also in those transitions. So you can never discount them from the title race. I think they're gonna fall a little bit, especially also because of the European competition as well. They have some difficult matchups there, so I think at some point they might fall a little bit behind those top two and three. But at the same time, it's always going to be dangerous. I mean, Dortmund has been struggling against them for a few years now. Of course, first year with Sahin, we don't know how that's going to play out, but still expect really difficult games against them. And yeah, I don't know. I don't rate them as high, but at the same time, they are always dangerous. So you can never discount them out of the top four, top five race.
Yeah, I think they're gonna be like third, maybe. I think we initially put them as fifth, a little too high on Shaheen, maybe, for Pedro and I in our predictions. Like they'll be in about fourth, like third to fifth. I don't think they're a threat for the title. I'm gonna be honest. I think Eric, when you made a point about their midfield, and the only player you really named as being good was Haidara, and I think that's a great point because he's going to be injured for a decent portion of this campaign, assuming this campaign goes like every other campaign we've seen from Haidara. And it's really unfortunate for him as a player. There are other midfielders. It's Javier Schlager. He is terrible. Dortmund Dispatch listeners know that he's like one of my least favorite players to watch, regardless of if he was on a real team or
But
not.
he's got a ponytail.
Um, Javier Schlager, I think is how you pronounce it. I could be a little off there. They have Seavold, who they brought in from Salzburg, who's been like bad. We're talking about like Polinia being a liability in the possession. This guy's like worse than that. He's also worse at defending. Um, They brought him in for a considerable amount of money. I mean, it's right pocket to left pocket for the advertising firm, but it's still a big chunk of money. And like these are their guys in midfield. Kompel's another year older. Like we're talking about Orban being a year older. Kompel's a guy who's even older. Um, if either of their strikers go down, like they're in a bad way. Um, in my opinion, like even if they just miss a couple weeks, I think that's gonna be like pretty difficult for them because they're like who's their third choice? Paulson, or you play a winger up top, or you play Simons up top, and then you lose a bit of creativity or a bit of like the aerial dominance or like Fox in the box type stuff. So I just think they're a little weak there. I think their young French center back, whose name is escaping me,
Lukeba.
for the moment, Lukeba, he's very good on the ball, and that's cool. But if we're talking about over a league campaign, 34 matches, I think we saw a lot of like issues and inconsistencies from him last year. I don't think this is the year that he figures that out. I think their wing backs are fine for them to accomplish their goals of getting Champions League football and making sure their shirt sponsor gets to be seen by all the Champions League viewers. But beyond that, I don't think they're gonna be troubling anyone for the title. And that they do very well. Like if they're both their strikers go off and Xavi Simons maintains the same level of goal scoring output and creative output he did last year, I think then they can finish fifth. But I think they need all three of those players to do like ridiculous things for that to happen. Because I think the top of the Bundesliga is a bit too strong.
Yeah, I just don't see too many other teams being stronger than they are. I don't think Frankfurt is. I don't think Dortmund is. Leverkusen obviously lost to them. I don't know. I think at some point it becomes just kind of a numbers game. You're right, injuries will play a role.
They were very lucky to beat Leverkusen.
I mean,
I'm gonna be honest.
yeah, they won 3-2 away from home. Like I never attribute that to luck. I attribute that to
I mean,
like
like
Leverkusen may have
in
given.
terms of the chances.
Yeah, I mean, Leverkusen may have given the game away. Yes, but yeah, that's only because Red Bull basically like caused them to. But I will say one thing. Pedro mentioned their upcoming fixtures, and this is a really good point. This is where there could be some slippage. As you mentioned, Eli, that they might not be able to make up from. They play their upcoming fixtures in the Champions League. Excuse me. Three of the next four are Liverpool, Inter, and Aston Villa, and that's going to be draining. And that's really going to be those are going to be difficult English weeks, and that's potentially where they might drop off.
And you're not talking even about Celtic away. And
Exactly.
Celtic away is very different from Celtic at home. And then you could be looking at a situation in which their last two Champions League games they need like at least 4 points from, and Sturm Graz away, like you should be winning that, but then all of a sudden you need to play that match at a very, very high intensity. Sporting at home is not an easy match by any set of the
Right.
imagination. Um, so you need to take a point off of Villa or Liverpool at home or Inter away. Like you need to take some points here and beat Celtic away to not face those last two matches as essentially knockout ties, and then you're almost looking at already, just given the quality of sides they have to face, they're not going to be in the top eight for the Champions League, which means they're not going to get that bye. And they're going to have to play an extra, like, two matches, which is really, like, we're talking about right now, an extra knockout tie to qualify for the last 16. And they're going to have to play the last of their Champions League games as if they are knockout games, which is really going to take something off their legs. And like they have the nice young winger from Belgium, but we haven't seen him necessarily impress from the start of a game yet, which is very different. Dortmund fans will know with the likes of like Jamie Bino Gittins coming off the bench and dominating. But then in starts, he's looked like a player who's shown flashes of ability still, not necessarily a player who's dominated the way he has off the bench. And so if he's going to be asked to be starting a lot of games, or at least rotated into a lot of league games, that's a place where you could see another fall off if they have to rest any of their attackers in some of those matches. So I think like that sets them up for a very difficult situation, just because like they've performed worse in Europe, so they got a harder draw almost.
Yeah.
Or well, you
No,
can't even say that anymore because you play teams from every pot. They just got really unlucky.
true. Yeah. No, just following up to what you guys are saying, I think, yeah, Leverkusen are gonna fall behind at some point, especially because of those 2 points that we brought up, the difficult fixtures they have in the following weeks with the Bundesliga and the Champions League, and also the lack of depth in the squad that Eli just mentioned. I think we also forgot a few new factors for them. Antonio Nusso, of course, he started decently, but hasn't hit the ground running, but I think he will. And honestly, and also we also forgot Vermeer in the midfield. So maybe with Haidara and Vermeer in there, I see a really balanced and young midfielder that could potentially be interesting to see. And honestly, seeing the whole squad and trying to understand what Rose is trying to build, I can understand like having a full starting 11 and all the guys playing really good football. I feel like they have a shot at something if they can maintain the consistency. They have different profiles of wingbacks. They got Henriks playing the more inside guy, and you have the speedster in Brown. They had the different profiles of strikers, which complement each other a little bit. So I like those contrasts. We got Xavi Simons, who is more technical, and you also got Nusa, who is also more of a speedster and dribbler. So in that sense, I like those different profiles and how they add up to the scheme. But that's what we were saying. They have a difficult schedule of fixtures, and they also lack depth if those guys they go out for injuries or for any other reasons. So in that sense, I don't rate them as much in the title race, but that could be potentially a scenario where they're really dangerous to those top two, top three sides who are gonna fight for the Bundesliga.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're very dangerous whenever you play them. I just don't think over the course of a campaign they're gonna threaten anyone for a title. Like maybe they'll make a nice cup run in the DFB Pokal, but beyond that, I don't think they're competing for any honors really. I don't think it's necessarily in their goal because they'll be in plenty of big matches, which again is the goal when you're an advertising firm. And now we can go over to Bayer Leverkusen. And Eric, we're really going to lean on you because I would hope that you're watching full 90s every week.
Of course.
And this year, full 90s in the midweek as well in the Champions League. A step up from the Europa League. So hope you're enjoying that. So your positives, I would say, perfect in the UCL. You beat Feyenoord and Milan. Milan's a lot more impressive as Feyenoord is not the same team that we've seen in the past couple of years with Herr Traude stepping away, who I actually forgot is now at, I believe, Arbe, or excuse
Yeah.
me, the advertising firm. Almost misspoke there, Lawnball Leipzig. Um, but yeah, so not the same team in Feyenoord. Most of their top talent, Wafer, has gone as well. Um, but beating AC Milan is very impressive. Um, their only loss was won on XG by 1.1 against the advertising firm, which is what I meant. Like, Leipzig have some, or excuse me, the advertising firm has some excellent finishers, which can see that like swing a lot. But if you go down early, you would expect to put up a ton of XG. They did not. So that's a positive for Bayer Leverkusen in that match because like they got a little unlucky. They still have been dominating matches, not to the extent they were last year. But again, when you play Bayern and Leipzig in your opening 6 games, the sample size of your XG difference will kind of make that look a lot worse. It's 0.85, which is still very good, whereas last year was 1.29. But when 33% of that sample size is against the top four teams, you're looking at like that essentially being 50% bigger than it would be over a full campaign as a percentage of like how often you're playing a top four side, um, or like the four highest sides around you, however you'd want to put it, because Leverkusen only have to play three of the top four sides, so it's even higher technically. The negatives is dropping points to Kiel. A big thing Leverkusen did last year was in the first half of the season they took 3 points against every bottom three side they'd faced at that point. And that's very, very important in a title challenge. Like Dortmund lost the title because they dropped points to Bochum on the last day on goal difference, because if you can't beat the relegation candidates, um, there will be a team that will average like three or like only drop 2 points against all six of their matches against the teams in the relegation playoff and below, and that's hugely important to a title charge. So those are a big 2 points dropped, but aside from that, I think they look very convincing in pretty much every match.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, I mean, the team hasn't changed in almost in any way other than to add some new players. Alex Garcia, for example. Yeah, it's just the defense. I would say, but the offense is clicking. Victor Boniface, I think, is going to make himself one of the top strikers in Europe this season. He's just like that. As long as he doesn't get injured, as soon as that guy catches fire, he's unstoppable. And yeah, Jonathan Tah and Edmund Tapsoba, not playing quite as well as they did last year. A little bit more susceptible, fallible to deep balls again. We just, Bayer Leverkusen just seemed to switch off, the tie, the draw against Holstein Kiel. They were up 2-0 and drew 2-2. Red Bullet was basically the same thing, winning on two separate occasions and then ultimately losing. So it's a matter of concentration to some extent. It's I mean, it is. It's still a very, very potent team. As you say, the Champions League matches, they're undefeated right now, having beaten Feyenoord and Milan. That Feyenoord score, I think, flatters to deceive a little bit. Feyenoord could have actually gone into halftime with us at 2-2 or something like that. They missed some golden opportunities. I did enjoy that Milan match a lot because that looked like the Bayer Leverkusen defending from last year, where everybody was throwing themselves at the ball. There was a realization that maybe we're not the better team, but we're the hungrier team, so to speak, and that turned out well. But yeah, I mean, no complaints. At this point in time, I think the Bundesliga is still wide open. Dortmund and Leverkusen are in the top five. I think Dortmund number one and Leverkusen number four as far as the Champions League is concerned, in points and goal difference and so forth. And not that the Athletic is for me, the final word in sports, but they've definitely, the Athletic has tipped both Bayer Leverkusen and Dortmund to advance to the next round without having to do the playoff. And if things progress as they should, then yeah, that's the case. I think, and one of the things we've not talked about with all of these teams is that they're all still involved in the Pokal too. So there's a third title that everybody's kind of thinking about. Obviously, it's probably even though it's an important, it's not like in England where the FA Cup has been diminished. This is still a super important title. But for these five clubs, it is really kind of like the third on the ladder, on the rung, so to speak. So, but it's still, it's still going to take something out of you. At any rate, yeah, I like where Leverkusen is in the Champions League. Not, I'm okay for a letdown this year. Last year was so freaking unbelievable. Like, there's really no way I can begrudge them anything as long as they're not relegated this year. they can do whatever the hell they want.
Yeah. No, I have a similar analysis on Leverkusen. And I think it's a different story, especially because due to the end of last season, I think there is a Leverkusen before the Europa League final and after the Europa League final, especially with Gasperini and that Atalanta side. For me, Gasperini is one of the most underrated managers in the whole world, and he completely outplayed Xabi Alonso in that match completely, and he had no response. And that was the first time that okay, we're seeing this invincible Leverkusen. Of course, they're overperforming in some matches, and some was just a little bit ridiculous because they were scoring all these goals in the last minute, which they're still doing, but it was a little bit over the top. And everyone was thinking, oh, they're really invincible. And then I think it was that time when Superman finally finds his kryptonite and he's a little
Mhm.
bit let down. So I think Leverkusen is still a little bit getting back from that loss and just still trying to find themselves again. But at the same, especially with the new defense, Kosunu is out. And not that I rated him that high, but it's a different system now with Hincapie and got all those youngsters coming as the depth options. I like the depth in the other sectors that they acquired in the past transfer window. Alex Garcia is a nice piece to have as a depth for Palacios and Shaka. And I was expecting more of a big name signing at that right wing position because I rate Hoffman, but not as high. I think that was one of the positions they really could have upgraded in this transfer window. And Terry is a good player, but I was expecting maybe a different profile, maybe a more uh, certainty kind of guy. But at the same time, it's interesting, and I think they're gonna be okay. They're still playing their style, and they can still dominate matches. I think the match against Munich, it was just as we were discussing, really good pressing from Munich, but not ended up finishing those chances as much. They should have won them game for their dominance for a larger margin. But at the same time, Leverkusen still Leverkusen. They're still scoring those goals because they have the good players and they have the manager to do it. But at the same time, I would just give it uh, it's a little bit not that much of a fragility, but we can still see that kryptonite still with Leverkusen with those conceding more goals than they conceded last season in those
Mhm.
transitions with those high lines and the teams capitalizing over that. So in that sense, that's something we should pay attention to. And that's kind of what happened with Kiel and those kind of games. And those are the kind of matches you cannot lose if you want to contend for the
Exactly.
title. In that match against Bochum, Eli knows as a Dortmund fan, I was stressed in that match as much as any Dortmund fan, and I didn't want us to concede those goals to Bochum. But at the same time, it wasn't a perfect performance. At least we got 3 points, and that's what matters in matches against those relegation candidates. And those points probably, or not, maybe gonna make a difference in the end. But expect Leverkusen still the same level, but still dealing with that match against Atalanta. It's still figuring things out. And as long as the teams are understanding how Leverkusen play and how to counter that, I think they're gonna struggle a little bit in those nuances.
Yeah, I think I really agree with you about their right center back depth. The loss of Stanisic is very, very big. And then Kusunu goes down, and like the guy they brought in this summer who was a defender is a 19-year-old left-sided center back in Jean-Well Bolossian. So that's like a bit unfortunate. I think they're kind of anticipating Hincapie, I think, leaving for big money soon. Um I think that's the plan, if not Ta. And then having one of their left-sided guys slide over into the middle. I think Kusunu was arguably their most important, playing that like right-sided center back role. Terrier, I think, honestly, a bit disrespectful, Pedro. I think he's been unreal in France over the last like 3 to 5 years. So I think like if anything, they went for like a guy who is proven quality, definitely going to be able to provide something in the near future, rather than taking any type of gamble that could pay off for them. If they win this year, it could fall flat on their face. If like they don't win anything this year and then Xabi Alonso goes in the summer, I don't necessarily think Xabi Alonso is going to go in the summer, but I think um like signing those more proven guys always comes with like a bit of a risk if you don't like win now. I think though for Leverkusen they are capable of winning now, so I think they'll be fine with Terrier there. I think Alex Garcia still has like pretty much his whole prime ahead of him. So that's a very good signing at 26. Like, just getting him for his whole prime. What more can you like ask of a transfer? No like waiting period for a guy to find like consistent form or develop his game at all. Um, so that's kind of like my thoughts on Leverkusen. I don't know if Erik has any other thoughts on like your squad depth, aside from that like little hole at right-sided center back.
Yeah, I mean, I think as far as our squad depth is concerned, it's pretty good. I'm not too yeah, that I don't think is an issue. It's the mental aspect of having done what they did last year and kind of keeping it together this year, and remembering what it takes to to get to what the heights you did last year. But I do want to like look back at something that Pedro said about the Euro final against Atalanta. We were we were actually at that match. My girlfriend and I, and she's had to put up with Leverkusen for a long time. But this was one of the first matches she's ever seen, and she was absolutely blown away by because she'd been watching Leverkusen all season and had seen how they had put away other teams, and this was the first time she had seen how they were absolutely destroyed and put on the back foot from the get-go. And I think that lesson for Xabi Alonso is so important. I was at the end of it. I mean, it was a terrible. At the end of the match, you're like, "This sucked." But ultimately, I think in the big picture, that match was so important for Xabi Alonso because Pedro, you're right. Like Gasperini is completely an underrated. He's like Bielsa to some extent, like just a kind of a he's a trainer's trainer, and he really took the match to Bayer Leverkusen, knew exactly what to do with them in order to defeat them. And I think that's just going to make Xabi Alonso so much better. That one match may have been a terrible result, but ultimately for Xabi Alonso, and I don't know how long he's going to be with Bayer Leverkusen, but I think that match, he'll look back at it and say, that was one of the most important matches that I've ever had as a manager, and because I adjusted in this fashion. And yeah, it was masterclass. Got to give Gasperini, Atalanta is a fun team to watch, no question. Got to give them their props.
Yeah, I think that match also is kind of like a microcosm of the struggles you're kind of talking about this year. I don't think it's necessarily the mentality of like forgetting what you guys have come from. I think it's you guys have came out last year with this unique style that we hadn't necessarily seen before, and you played that way for like a long time, and now teams have had a lot longer to sit
Hmm.
back, watch every minute of your gameplay against every different style of football. And so every coach in a deep block can see like what part of the tactics of various deep blocks worked against Leverkusen, and everyone has seen a lot more of you having been now in a title charge, that kind of everyone is doing their version of what Gasparini is doing a bit better. Whereas last year with a newer system, and then some friendly refereeing, with Stanisic tackling Nico Schlotterbeck and not receiving even a yellow card and then scoring the equalizer in that one. You're kind of
Not
seeing
sorry, not
that
sorry.
you're you're not getting every call going your way. It does take luck to go unbeaten. It's impossible to do it without it. And also like just teams have adapted to play against you because when you dominate, that's what they do. Um, so yeah, let's move on to Dortmund now. So the positives, perfect in the UCL, and match week one, we beat Eintracht Frankfurt, and they've obviously been in sensational form for the rest of the season. At the start, drawing against Bayern, obviously. So good to pick up those 3 points early in the season, as they kind of hit their run of form. Uh, I talked about it a lot last week, so I'm going to kind of move it aside. I just think that we need to learn how to press as a team and not rely on Nico Schlotterbeck to be perfect, or it'll be a similar situation as last year where we have elite center backs that are just asked to defend all game long. And you'll see a guy like Mats Hummels, who's very, very good positionally, conceding penalties and red cards last year. He's gone now, so it'll have to be someone else picking those up. And I think that someone else picking those up is honestly a bigger issue for Dortmund because they won't have the same like massive reputation to withstand the kind of criticism that usually comes along with conceding a penalty or a red card.
Yeah, sure. I think I'm gonna start this one since I'm in a Dortmund podcaster and fan, so I know a lot about this club. And yeah, I think Eli really summarized all the points that worry us about Borussia Dortmund this season. The press, at first, we are not consistently pressing our opponents as we should, so we are not recover the ball in those dangerous areas and to provide to our, especially to our wingers and our attackers. So I think we have really good options in that sector, but we are not giving them those quality chances with our press. So that's a thing that needs to get better. And also, it's a little bit of trying to find itself kind of saga because Sahin's still trying to find the ideal formation. I don't think there's necessarily a perfect 11 that you should play every game, but you should at least have an idea of what to do and which formation to use against which opponent. And I wasn't in the podcast last week against Union Berlin, but I thought we should have played a back three against them, especially mirror their formation and try to use those wing backs and those wingers to really hurt them. Didn't work, and we always have that problem with Dortmund, especially playing away, not hit the ground running early, especially in the first halves. We seem a little bit sleepy still, and we only start to waking up by the beginning of the second half. So that's another thing that worries me. But I think it's all about Saim and trying to figure out what to do and which formation and what, because we know the style, we know with what kind of football he wants to play, we know the players because the squad's already there. I think we could have a little bit more of a depth at the sixth position, but now that's gone. We can only fix that in the winter transfer window. But yeah, I think it's all about figuring out what you're gonna do and which opponent you're gonna use those formations, because it's good that you have different options, but you need to be able to use them and capitalize on it. And Saim's still trying to figure which kind of manager he's gonna be for Dortmund. So in that sense, that still worries me, but I mean, it's still part of the process. It's good, of course, that we're perfect in the Champions League, even though we're still gonna find the bigger opponents in Barcelona and Real Madrid in the next few weeks. So I'm curious to see how Sahim is gonna play and how he's gonna react against those clubs. But I don't know. It still hasn't convinced me fully yet. But I've seen good insights. I think in the beginning of the year we tried to play with the back three. It's kind of similar with the formation that Leverkusen got famous for from last season and playing the right back as the right wing back. In Frimpong, we had Ryerson. I thought Jan Koto was going to be that guy, but he hasn't started in that formation yet. So I don't know. I think it's all about Sahim and him trying to fully implement his scheme and just figuring out what he wants to do.
Can I ask to the both of you, just because out of curiosity, you mentioned Mats Hummels earlier, and now Marco Reus is living in the same city where I am. So losing those two, massive figureheads that were, such a part of Dortmund for the longest time, how has that affected the team? I know Mats Hummels didn't leave under necessarily the best circumstances, and I know that Marco Reus left his last game because my buddy was at the game. He bought everybody in the stadium a beer, which is just the classiest thing I've ever heard. But yeah, what's it like without those two? Is there something missing? Is there an element that you need to find with these newer players?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a leadership issue kind of going on right now. I think Schlotterbeck is very young. I think Brandt is very soft spoken, and your outspoken guy is Emre Can. And when your outspoken guy is a dominant performer that's consistently at the top of the game, like Mats Hummels, that allows you to complement that very well with a soft-spoken leader, like a Marco Royce, for instance. So I think there's like an issue there. I think that we haven't necessarily seen the ball get put in any central areas um, for Brant to kind of be the player he's been for the last 3 seasons. And I think that's led to a lot of criticism for him, and he needs to be better and find the ball in those areas. And I think that his leadership issues have been uh, overstated. What's been understated is the leadership issues of Emre Can, because this is a guy that has, for over a decade, been fighting players, pushing around guys, getting silly yellow cards, stuff like that. Um, and I think you've kind of seen issues in which we'll be later on in a match, and someone other than Emre Can will start a shoving match when we are drawing a team that is below us in the table that's very happy with 1 point against us. And wasting time like that is a self-inflicted wound. And having a guy like Emre Can there has kind of set a bad example for me. Like I remember last year, I don't remember which match, I saw Jamie Bino Gittins got like got lightly fouled and immediately like starts pushing the other guy, and we wasted like 5 minutes of the match on this, and we were drawing, and we ended up dropping points in that match. And to me, that's unacceptable, because when you're losing, that's when you should be piling the pressure on. And so we need a guy that is a bit more outspoken, whoever that's going to be, whether it's Kobel or Schlotterbeck or Sabitzer, to kind of step up and be outspoken without having that combative nature. Because if you're talking about like your own team self-inflicting these time-wasting wounds when you're drawing matches late on, that's really going to cost you turning, like, even if it's 1 or 2 matches from a draw to a win or a loss to a draw, that's, you're looking at like 4 to 5 points a season that you're going to lose if you're going to be consistently wasting time doing these silly little shoving matches consistently that we've seen. And also just like not necessarily like urging the team on in the best ways. And then it also forces you to play that outspoken captain, even if it's at the detriment to the team, because Emre Can's a lot better at retaining the ball than Nemecha, but he's been worse this season at progressing the ball and like winning the ball back. And so if Nemecha's the guy who has a better understanding at the six of how to get the ball forward, even if he's going to have some dumb giveaways, but he's also going to be a bit better defensively. He understands how Shaheen wants him to press. That's a guy that you want to be starting. But if he's not your captain, and you don't want to drop your captain because it's going to be this big story in the press and whatever, like that's more where the issue comes in.
Yeah, no, I
And
just adding up to what Eli said, I think
oh, sorry, go ahead, Pedro.
oh, no problem. I just gonna add up to what Eli just said. Is for me, it's not only about the leadership itself. I think it's an important factor, and what Eli said is correct in my opinion. But at the same time, I think that tech technical aspect and being the technical reference in the squad, especially with Matt Hummels, because he was the one who was consistently playing last season and being that dominant guy, especially in the Champions League and some league matches as well. So in that sense, losing a guy like that, which I thought could still contribute to this team and being the reference there and being the captain. I also not a big fan of Emre Can. So in that sense, I think we don't have that direct successor, the guy who is gonna take the armband and really represent the squad in the same way Hummels did. So I think in that sense, I think it wouldn't hurt us to sign him with another 1 or 2 years contract. Marco Reus, I think it's more of the effect of his aura because he wasn't playing regularly, and I didn't think he should be playing regularly. I think he was more of a contributing from the bench kind of guy at this point of his career, and I think that's why also he went to the MLS as well. All the respect, guys, and America and all that, but yeah, it's
Don't even worry about
but
it.
I mean, what was the quote about guys going to MLS, and if they're in New York or LA, it's basically a retirement tour?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, Marco Royce deserves his retirement tour. I'll put it that way.
makes sense. Yes. Yeah, but I think that's more the thing for me, being that technical reference in the squad. And even though Royce was not the guy playing, he was still contributing from the bench. I think he was still an important bench player and a presence in the dressing room. I think it's a little bit of both. Not having that technical guy who is also a leader really hurts us in that sense.
Yeah, and he was a guy that I think did a lot of the things that I talked about Emerson doing, like the opposite of. Whenever we were not winning a match, Marco Royce knew how to kind of like do the little things to avoid the time wasting and to like urge his team on. Even if he is a more soft spoken leader, he was still doing all those things, and he was still a mentor to a lot of the players. Like everyone talks about Marco Royce, telling them where to go in Dortmund, what things to do, stuff like that. And I think we had Rob Turner, who's lived in Dortmund and is a commentator on the Bundesliga World Feed on our show. And what he kind of said is Marco Royce can kind of help a footballer unlock the beauty in Dortmund because it's a very beautiful place once you get to know it and once you know where to go. But on the surface, it might not be unless you're like coming from the United States, like when I recently went. I immediately think it's beautiful because I just see a bunch of guys walking around in Dortmund stuff, and I'm like, this is great. But for a footballer, it might not be the same. But having a guy there who can show you around and just be a positive influence in helping you into the dressing room makes a massive difference, even if Dortmund's not the most beautiful city in the world.
But yeah, I actually grew up in the Ruhr Valley, and none of. I mean, Germany's beautiful because of all the rivers and because of all the forests and so forth, and they definitely exist in those areas too. But yeah, nobody has ever said like, yeah, Dortmund's in my top 10 list of most beautiful cities in Europe, or much less Germany, even perhaps. But yeah, I mean, and it's the second biggest club, right? Second biggest club in Germany. I mean, it's got yeah,
By membership, I would say the biggest.
yeah, okay, by
Yeah, I was gonna say
membership.
the same thing.
Yeah, I know, and it's you guys, Schalke and Bayern, if I'm not mistaken, right? Who are usually the top three.
Yeah.
So, yeah, yeah, there's a reason for
We're top by average attendance. Bayern are top by members. I think we're second or third usually for members. I think second, and then I think Schalke's a distant third. But I think there's a distance between them and everyone
yeah,
else.
they're
But
tops
yeah,
for antisocial fans, Schalke.
hey, well, we have one last club to kind of get through, and that's VfB Stuttgart. Teddy had a conflict today, who usually joins us from VFB, the VFB Stuttgart Americana podcast. Um, he's, I'd say, a friend of the show, but he's only ever on after Stuttgart beats us, which is also coincidentally just like lined up in the timeline that the Dortmund Dispatch podcast is probably at fault for all those losses because ever since we've existed, I think we've only lost to Stuttgart. Uh, but their XG difference is right around the same as Bayer Leverkusen at zero point 0.8. They are second in the league for XG created. The negatives, it's one UCL point, and they are 5 points off the top of the table. I think that, to me, the biggest issue for them is just getting their center back pairing or their back three, just getting the understanding there. Losing Anton is very big for them. And just, I think their defensive issues really come down mostly to new center back signings not necessarily gelling immediately, which is expected when you have new center back signings. They have a ton of like U23 center backs they've added. Amin Al Dakil, Henri Chase, um, and then a couple, I think Sturgio has been added there as well. So all these guys are just young. They need time. And that's really like the issue that I think they've had going on in the league. And then I think I did watch their match against Sparta Praha in the Champions League, and it was really naive after they leveled. Praha leveled, and Stuttgart really were just coming out and like it's a league game, and like their opponent was going to have to play against them to any degree, which Praha did not want to do. They never were going to do that. Every time the ball went long, they were literally just looking to time waste essentially, and they didn't know how they wanted to create chances. Where if you look at top sides, whether it's like constantly trying to win set pieces, constantly trying to get to the ball to the end line, they just didn't know what to do. And they did some of these things a little bit here and there, but to me, they just did not know how to manage that game once they went level. So to me, I think Honus needs to learn how to manage a tournament format like the UCL, and their backline needs to get minutes together, and I think they'll be more than fine.
No, completely agree. And I think from the clubs that we've spoken until now, I think Stuttgart is the one that I watched the least. I think, except from the Real Madrid game and the match against Dortmund, of course, which hopefully I wanted to forget, but I still can, unfortunately. But in that sense, I think they still had really good recruitment this season, especially because they lost a lot of important pieces in Enter and Girassi, for instance. So in that sense, I think with this new recruitment and getting more minutes together and figuring out Champions League football and having a guy like Honas as a manager, I think it's only gonna take a little bit of time for them to get everything back together on track and just coming back being their dangerous Stuttgart team that we're used to since last season. And I think they're gonna be dead around the top four fight as well. Just also not as sure with the squad depth. I still think they have some decent depth, but especially with sides like Leverkusen and Bayer and Dortmund to an extent as well, they might hurt them a little bit. Uh, but I don't know. I think with all the calendar and all the matches they have to play, it's gonna really be difficult for them to keep on the same level of play. But even with Jonas, but hopefully they stick with that. It's a great narrative. I love watching them play when I have time. And even against Madrid, that match that I watched, they could have easily won that match. They created a ton of chances, and it wasn't for just luck and just some really good saves from Courtois. I think it could have been uh, really dark times for Madrid on that day. But yeah, still interested how to see how it if it's gonna be the same or if they're gonna elevate the level from last season.
Yeah, Pedro speaking from my heart. This is, uh, although Pedro, you may not have watched them much. This is the team that I watch most regularly after Leverkusen. I absolutely love this Stuttgart team. I never thought I'd say that about a Hoeneß, a coach team, but Sebastian Hoeneß, in my opinion, is just he's good, and he's going to take his lumps in Europe probably this year, but that's only going to make him a better trainer. And I agree with you, Pedro. They should have gone into halftime against Madrid leading 2-0 or 3-0. And you knew when they went in at 0-0, you knew exactly what was going to happen. You can't give up those kind of chances against Madrid. They're always going to end up winning. They'll always end up winning that match. But I mean, yeah, they are Undav is proving not only for Stuttgart but also for the German national team that losing Girassi is not going to be the end of the world for Stuttgart. He might even be better for them than Girassi was. Furish hasn't quite reached the heights that he did last season, but he'll be contributing again regularly. I have no doubt. And Mio is that just signing from the summer where just made that just
Mio's been there.
was he there last year?
He's been there for like 3 years now, I think.
Really?
Yeah,
Totally.
he
Well,
this is really
well, then he's really
his
come
breakout
to the.
campaign.
Yeah, I was going to say that he's made a break. I totally didn't realize that. Then he's made. Yeah, I mean, this has been his breakout campaign.
He's been a French youth international, which everyone knows. Like French youth international teams are basically national teams for a lot of countries because that's how much talent France is producing. So I always thought he had the potential to be good because of that alone. But like I think 2 years ago when they were in like the relegation playoff fight, whatever it was, I thought he looked fairly useless. But he was so young, like I still thought the talent could be there. And then last year I was like, oh, this looks like a decent player. And then this year he's like one of the best players in the league.
And
So
give
they have that going for him.
and give
And Undav is special.
Yeah, and give credit too to Nubo. They look much more secure back there. He's having an influential season, and it's kind of, as you mentioned, their back line needs all the help they can get, and he's he's a good figure to have back there between the sticks.
Okay, and then the last thing, because we are a little over an hour now, the last thing I just wanted to touch on is football rankings per Nils McKay to secure the extra Champions League spot again next season. England is 91.1% likely, and then Portugal 38.8%, Germany at 24.4%. I think a lot of this is based off like very early kind of statistical small sample sizes based off your Champions League games. So I think that Italy right below us at 24%. I think what this is really going to come down to is, can Stuttgart and RB Leipzig, the advertising firm, find a way to kind of like challenge to either make the last 16 or at least get into the top 24 and win one of their play-in games for the last 16. And of the other three that are very likely to advance in the top 8, or at least like the top 12-ish and basically be a lock for the last 16, which of Bayern, Dortmund, and Leverkusen do you think, with your head not heart, is going to be the one to make the deep run and guarantee the 5th spot again for the Bundesliga?
You can go first, Erik.
And I'm just realizing, damn it, I guess it doesn't matter because I would say, oof, that's tough. I don't think it's necessarily going to be Bayern Munich. I think to some extent the result will turn out in how the matchups are aligned. I'm more inclined to say Bayer Leverkusen and Dortmund will be, or Dortmund will be one of the two teams. They just, they seem to feel pretty comfortable in this tournament, and I don't know. I'll go with Dortmund or Leverkusen.
Yeah, no, I agree. I was gonna have the same answer, and I think Stuttgart and Leipzig, I think they have a decent chance of getting, even in the 24 teams that are probably not necessarily go to the last 16, but still got a fairly shot at being in the same that same range. So I think it's gonna come down to those two as well. But I think England is gonna have that spot either way. I think the first one, I think they're not gonna fall behind from. I mean, it was expected them to get one of those last season and it completely fall apart, but I don't think it's gonna happen this time. So I think Germany really needs to step up and getting at least one of those two clubs in the last 16.
It's truly unfortunate we didn't get Manchester United flopping out of the Champions League again this year. You have to unfortunately perform well to get in, but that's kind of what we relied upon last year. And unfortunately this year we can't rely on that because they were so bad. But yeah, I think this year, for the Champions League, I would almost say Bayern could very easily make a deep run. It really just comes down to like we all kind of hinted at it a little bit earlier, or Erik hinted at it mainly. But Upamecano, I think over a league season, his issue is he's gonna have a few matches where he just loses his head, plays like a completely unrecognizable player, and is bad. If he avoids that for the Champions League knockouts, he is still one of the best center backs in the world. So he really just needs to not have a moment where he like forgets he's marking someone, or like doesn't need to commit a like red card challenge. And they'll be fine in the Champions League. Like this is a team that still knocked out Arsenal last year when they had like a hanging a dead duck or whatever the saying is. or a lame duck coach in Tuchel last year. They still knocked out Arsenal. Like, this is a team that doesn't necessarily need a lot going for them to win Champions League ties because of the experience they have in them. So I think they'd be the most likely. And then I'd have to say Leverkusen, because we kind of talked about how they added so much depth this year in the midfield and in attacking areas. I think there's been like an issue with like Palacios's fitness.
He's back.
And he's back now, yeah. And he's honestly like maybe your second most important midfielder, and probably a top 4 midfielder in the league, in terms of 6s and 8s at least. So that's hugely important. And having so much depth, I think Leverkusen is very likely to make a semifinal or a quarterfinal at the very least. Quarterfinal almost regardless of draw. I would favor you over most sides, to be honest.
From your lips to God's ears.
Dortmund, it's really all on whether or not we can learn how to press, because right now against any competent side, we just don't know how to win the ball. It's like, please just hit a ball out of play, and that's about it. With Karim Adeyemi going off, that's your other hope, but it's really, there's not a lot going for us.
No, but I still think it's also with this different format. I think things change completely because it seems it's longer because we have 2 extra games, but you don't really have time to breathe because if you don't hit the ground running early, and I think Dortmund did that, and also as Stuttgart didn't, you're already behind, and there's more competition for you to try to overcome and try to get in those 24s. So in that sense, I think it's even more complicated. And that good start from Dortmund and the matchups that we got, we don't have really difficult matchups aside from Real Madrid and Barcelona, which I think we can get at least 1 or 2 draws, hopefully. So I think in that sense, it's also going to help Dortmund in that sense. So that's why I said Dortmund. But yeah, it also depends on the other matchups. I don't have them on my head right now, but I think it all depends on which sides are gonna overperform in those kind of games. I think Bayern is gonna do fine as well. I think Leverkusen as well. They already won 2 really fairly difficult matches, more the one against Milan. So I think Germany, I think in general we have a decent chance. I think it should be higher in those stats.
Yeah, I think the thing for Dortmund is what would be so important for them is if they can kind of guarantee top 8 before, like, by the 6th match, then you're kind of looking at essentially being able to experiment a little bit with like a different midfield pairing, and maybe Nemecha and Watkins play together in the last 2 matches, and they cook everybody, and all of a sudden we go with that into the second half of the season. Or maybe it's like Nemecha and Gross, or like something like that, and then all of a sudden we're playing like Nemecha, Gross, coming out of that with Watkins rotating in more, and then Sabitzer and Brandt are the 2 10s now, and like the side looks a lot more coherent. But we'll see, because until I believe the midfield can and like our attacking line can press. I haven't seen it yet. I think that as soon as it clicks, we could start looking like a really elite side. But until I see it click, I'm just going to be very negative. I'm going to be honest. But yeah, I think that's it. Erik, is there anything you want to plug before we head out?
No. We haven't done the Neverkusen podcast in several years. That's a relic from 2011 through 2021, I think, something like that. But yeah, thanks for asking me on here. It's been a real pleasure talking with you both about the Bundesliga, about these top 5 teams, yeah, it's let's hope for another good year. I think this year will be close. I think there will be 3 or 4 teams that are vying for it at the top at the end of the year, and yeah, that always makes it fun.
Yeah, as always.
Yeah, and Pedro, welcome back to Twitter. After they had banned it in Brazil, they can all follow you right there at Del_Pedro23. Is there anything else you want to plug?
No, that's pretty much it. I just want you guys to follow us, Dortmund Dispatch on Twitter, all social media. Subscribe to our channel on YouTube, please, and keep watching the episodes and supporting us. And see you guys next time.
Yeah, and also Pedro recently wrote a Jan Koto article that he didn't
Yes,
plug. I'll plug it.
almost
Make sure
forgot
you
about that,
search
please.
that up. And read that on BVB Buzz. And that's it for me. Follow us on Dortmund Dispatch. Rate us 5 stars anywhere you listen to podcasts. And thank you again, Erik, for joining us. And have a good one.